It doesn't exist. So always categorize your object visually, even if it has incomplete provenance. And that might help you at least gain some insight about what this object is. So the identification bit may become easier. Things like dateline, timeline may not be available, but you might have a provenance in terms of what this object is, where is it from, so what place does it come from, and how did it come into the museum. And that can be a completely different trajectory towards research also. So I have in the past worked with objects with ambiguous provenance. I've worked with objects with incomplete provenance and absolutely no locational information or timeline. But that doesn't mean that the object is completely unreadable. It is unreadable to some extent. It can't be the center of your project, but it can always be an appendage to whatever you're studying. So in that case, treat your object as an auxiliary or an appendix to your main area of research.
I think that's very important what you said, and especially in the context of researchers working with museum objects. It's important that we try multiple avenues of reaching to the museum authorities and, find ways of working with them, and we will definitely be able to connect with them at some level, and in some cases that does turn out to be very helpful for research. So there's a question by Neldria Crasto. Does relying on secondary textual sources for research also lead to misinterpretation of provenance when there is a lack of primary sources?
Absolutely, it does. It does. If you are reading the wrong person, then you get the wrong idea about an object. It's not just true to objects, it's true about sites as well. It's true about anything in history. If you're reading the wrong books, you have the wrong perspective towards it. If you're reading something that is written with a propaganda in mind, for example, you will perforce have that as the framework of your mind. If you're watching the wrong kind of shows about historical depictions, you might have a completely wrong notion of a particular period in history, the Mughal history, for example. If you're watching the wrong kind of TV series on how Akbar was and how his relationship with his son was, you might end up forming a completely distorted picture of the Mughal times and the life and times of Akbar and Jahangir. So while there were troubles between the two, your idea of the trouble might be different. The same is also true for objects. If you've read somebody's paper on, I read a lot of papers on Darpan Dharani, for example, and one of them described it as a woman who had come out of love making and she was trying to look at where all she has been marked. So where all does she have nail marks on her face or bite marks on her face? And that was a completely wrong representation of Darpan Dharani. If you try to read Shilpa Prakash, which is very difficult, it's a text in Odissi. So for somebody from North India, it's extremely difficult to come across a translation. But when you read it, the purpose of a Darpan Dharani is not any of that. She's just one of the yantras. So Shilpa Prakash describes it as one of the secular sculptures, all of them have been described as yantras. And the yantras exist to conceal a powerful enchantment. What that enchantment is only known to the temple priest, but they are just created to divert your attention. If you looked into it away from that textual interpretation of why the Darpan Dharani existed, you will find that the Darpan Dharani was also there in the Buddhist stupas. And she was then slowly associated with Nanda Sundari, who was Buddha's stepsister and who had converted into Buddhism, but she was very self-obsessed. So she kept looking at her face. She was very narcissistic. But if you sort of trace it back in an archaeological fashion, you find that Greco-Roman art had lady with a mirror. The Greeks in turn had sort of derived this concept of lady holding a mirror from the Egyptians. The Egyptians had mirrors, handheld mirrors that was actually shaped like a woman's body, and the woman was looking into the mirror, except the reflecting surface was towards your face. So that was known as a caryatid mirror, where the handle is shaped like a woman's body. So you're holding this handheld mirror from the woman's body. It appears that the woman is looking into the mirror and you are doing exactly the same. So it was supposed to be like that fun mirror image that the Greeks made far back in 3000 BC. The Greeks really liked it. So in the Ptolemaic period, they pick up that idea. It percolates into Greco-Roman art. From the Greco-Roman art, it comes into Iranian art. From the Iranian art, it comes into the Buddhist stupas of Gandhara. And from Gandhara, it then percolates onto other stupas. Then the Jains pick it up. From the Jain temples, it comes into the Hindu temples. So for the first time that you start getting Darpan Dharani figurines, 10th, 11th century, is the same time that Shilpa Prakash is being written. And since there is no religious explanation as to why is there a lady holding a mirror sculpture here, and nobody really traced it back to Egypt back then, it's hiding a yantra. So depending on what interpretation you take, you can go on and go ahead with it. But if you read some of the modern papers on Darpan Dharani figures from the Sanghol Stupa, you might find that a lot of people have had a lot of things to say. Not all of them have been very palatable. A lot of them have just gone on to describe the object very, very subjectively, and then gone on to talk about what they think the object says. Of course, there are figurines in Hindu temples. I'm not denying that. There are figurines of women from Hindu temples that show women in that post-coital state, where they're sort of looking at their bodies and, they're looking at something, not in a mirror, but they are sort of inspecting themselves. For the women that have been shown with nail marks and bite marks and all of that in sculptures. But Darpan Dharani herself was never supposed to be that woman. So reading the wrong interpretation in a secondary piece of work, because Shilpa Prakash is so unreadable, is completely plausible, and it happens all the time.
That's very true. And that also brings to my mind how even when we're looking at primary texts, sometimes there are numerous primary texts which talks about the same object. So, for example, when I was working on Sri Devi and Bhudevi sculptures, I realized that there is the Vishnu Dharmottar, and then there are at least 3 to 4 agams which have something or the other to talk about their iconography. So, even when we consider primary sources, it's important that we consider multiple sources that exist, if they exist at all, and maybe not just look at one text, because in cases such as this, where there are 4 texts telling me about that object, there might be, one feature or another that comes up from different texts. So it just gives you a more holistic picture of the object that you're dealing with. So I think that also becomes very important. So I'll just take one more
I think
question.
adding to that, sorry.
Sorry, ma'am. No, please go on.
Go ahead with the question. I think I'll just add it to the question as a comment.
Yeah. So there's Cohen Ray, who says it is generally expected that we have shorter object labels because a layman is not expected to do much. In such a scenario, how much information should absolutely be included in the object label in case of an object having a longer biography?
So, Koel, I think I've already answered that. I said have a website instead, where, whoever needs whatever about the object is available on that website. The links are available. If there are papers written on the object, and those papers are available as online entries on academia, ResearchGate, Google Scholar, have those appended to your website, have them as hyperlinks to your website, so that if there is a researcher and he wants more, he can go to the site, to the thing itself, to the website itself, right? Whereas while curating a museum display, make it more effective as a visual. Because I've said that at the beginning, I've also said it in the middle, objects are visual entities. So if I'm not attracted by what I see, and if I go there, even as an archaeologist, and I have so much to read, I have like this whole paragraph to read about the object, it's so incredibly boring. One of the most interesting things that I've seen recently in a museum display is Ashmolean recently revised their Near East gallery. And you have all these specimens. So at the time that Nineveh was destroyed by ISIS, Ashmolean was acquiring all these fragments from Nineveh. So whatever survived was coming into Ashmolean somehow. And they were displaying it very frantically. And these long paragraphs telling us about what happened at Nineveh, this, that, and everything. Now what they've gone on and done is in that gallery, they have this complete audio-visual display about Nineveh destructions, which panel came from where. And while the documentary talks about it, a flashlight goes and it highlights that particular panel. So everything about that is displayed in a different manner. Whereas if you look at the object itself, there's no provenance at the bottom. Similarly, a lot of museums curate displays in a very interesting way. So if you were to go to the Brighton Museum, for example, their pre-history display is amazing. Now, archaeologists come out of that gallery cribbing about how there is no provenance whatsoever. But a layman goes into it and is absolutely fascinated. And they think it's completely worth the £7 of their money to go into Brighton Museum, because it starts with the earliest evidence of hominins in England, and specifically from Brighton area. So the first display is a Neanderthal, and it's a replica of a Neanderthal. Then it shows the stone tools that Neanderthals made. It then goes on to talk about the kind of houses Neanderthals built, and then it shows you a display of those houses. Then there is a documentary that comes in, how stone tools were made by Neanderthals. You watch that documentary, it's not longer than 2 minutes, because that's the attention span of a layman. You then go on and then you start looking into from prehistory to history, from Paleolithic to Mesolithic to Neolithic. So there's this complete evolution. And when you come out of that gallery, the last thing that you've seen on display is the Anglo-Saxons. And you absorb so much of history. Wherever possible, they have specimens. Wherever possible, they have skeletons, real skeletons that were found from the area on display. But when you're looking at those skeletons, even if you have like a 2-year-old, 3-year-old child looking at that, he's not scared by the skeleton. He's fascinated because there's just so much to capture your imagination with. There are models, there are replicas, there are documentaries that are going on, there are audio visuals, but there is nothing to read as such. So there is no heavy brain work. And nobody likes to go to a museum to read. You know, if I want to, I don't go to museums and read stuff. I generally go to museums when I'm documenting things. I go to a particular gallery, I take pictures, all the pictures I can. I come back home and then I start looking into maine aaj dekha kya. That's when I do the reading. So if I, as an archaeologist, as an object analyst at that, don't look at what the provenance says, I can't expect a layman to do that too. So the museum has to have some other repository where that information is accessible for whoever is interested in that kind of information. Otherwise, the museum just has to be a public-friendly place, which is engaging, interesting, and informative. So at the end of the day, a person has to walk out of the museum feeling the same way as he does when he's walking out of a movie theater. आज कुछ सीखने को मिला और आज कुछ interesting देखा. And that's essentially what the museum experience also has to be like. If it's just long provenance tables, nobody is going to read it. Yes, the museum is a place for researchers also, but then, like I said, museums need to be more researcher friendly. So for people who want to access that information, there should be a separation of sorts that allows you to do that. There should also be things like Ask the Curator sessions. A lot of museums do that worldwide. So there is a special session in a particular time slot where the curator takes you along the gallery. And that is really, really rewarding because you get to learn so many things. So if you're a researcher, that's more productive to what you are seeking. But if you're somebody who's just walking into the museum for the heck of it, make it an interesting place to walk into.
Thank you, ma'am. That does answer a lot of our questions, and it was really interesting listening to you speak about all of this because at the Birla Academy also, this has been the idea behind the entire event and the session that we have planned, that we wanted to have this conversation about research on museum objects and museum objects in general, because the Birla Academy has this diverse collection of objects, starting from Gandhara School of Art to the modern times. And there are not just sculptures, but also paintings and um, miniatures and inscriptions and coins and a lot of them. So, if there's a note with which I would like to end this session today, then it would be my request to all the participants here to, if possible, visit the Birla Academy's collection whenever you are in Calcutta, or at least try to, look at it from our website. And we would be very happy to have researchers working on the museum collections. And this is something that we also spoke about the first day of the session when we had students from the Calcutta University, that if there is someone who wants to do research, they can always write to the curator. the email ID is there in the website itself, and we would request them to write a letter and send an application, and the museum will definitely get back to you with all the, with all the help that you need. And we would request you to also, engage with the museum objects in a very fruitful manner. So thank you so much, everyone attending the session, and ma'am, for giving us your time and giving us this interesting talk, which has really opened new avenues of thinking about these objects. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Diptarka, and thank you so much to everybody at the Birla Academy of Art and Culture for taking up this initiative. Like I said from the very beginning, this is a dialogue that we need to have. Researchers and museums can't work in isolation from each other. We both need each other equally. So while the researcher needs a place which supports their research and which provides them information, museum might also need researchers in ways that they haven't seen so far, or in ways that they didn't envisage so far. So I think this dialogue was very important. And I'm very, very happy that a museum in India has taken this initiative to have this dialogue, to get multiple people come in and talk about objects within museums and objects within museum collections. I think it's a fabulous, fabulous endeavor and a brilliant initiative. And I wish Birla Academy all the very best. And I look forward to more such sessions in the future. I think it was very, very rewarding for all of us who've attended these sessions in the last 3 years. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you so much, everyone. So, with this, I'd like to end this session. And once again, I thank our curator, Uma Ray, who has been instrumental in helping us organize this session and who has been very encouraging with all the sessions that we have. Unfortunately, she couldn't attend today's session because there was a meeting that suddenly came up. But she would have really loved being in this session. And thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, ma'am, once again for doing this session with us. And I hope these 3 days have been a learning experience for everyone who has been there. And maybe you have something to take away from these sessions. So, and we hope to do more of these in future. So thank you so much, everyone. And please take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.